Welcome to this episode of the CRO Spotlight Podcast. This is Warren Zenna. I'm the founder of the CRO Collective. And thanks again for tuning in. I'm getting a lot more people writing me very nice notes about the episodes. So that's encouraging. Every time I produce one of these things, I never know if it's going to be any good or not. I think that was stupid, but it's not them. It's always me, So anyway, I appreciate it, and it's great. I got some really great guests lined up, and one of them is here today. Really happy to have Sandy Robinson. The Revenue Alliance produced a really great series of revenue-focused events, and one of them is the CRO Summit, which many of you know I speak at. And Sandy and I spoke there together, and she's great. She's a really great perspective that I so resonated with, and I thought we definitely should talk. She's a great speaker, really smart. More specifically, what she's talking about is the revenue stack, or what she calls the Rev Stack, and RevTech, which I think is just a really smart way of looking at the world. So Sandy, welcome, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just very excited. I felt the same way when we were kind of sharing the stage and watching your intro about everything centering around the customer. It just really resonated with me. And I was like, man, this guy, we've got to connect and we've got to do stuff. And I got to talk to you more. It was just really exciting to kind of hear your perspective as well. But I'm Senior Vice President of Revenue Operations and Enablement at Patra. We're a tech-enabled insurance company. We provide insurance outsourcing from we have a tech and a people side of our business. I've been in revenue operations, sales for, I don't want to count how many years, but
Yeah, it's okay. You can do it. I'm older than you, so it's all good. You're a young chicken.
enough to where I started out selling Yellow Pages advertising. So that'll tell you.
So did I. So did I.
Did you?
So
No.
funny. Yeah, I did.
Shut
I did. Yeah.
up. Really? That's
I think
awesome.
everybody, and any salesperson at some point got sucked into that one because it was such a huge business at the time. They always needed people. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, it was so fun though. Like
It was. Those are good days, right? You're using
thrived off it.
the dial-up phone, and you're hammering away.
Oh,
I remember.
yeah.
I
We had
missed
those
that.
phones at our desk, and it was like, you're kind of dialing for dollars, and then
Yep.
when the other guy gets hung up on, you kind of make fun of him, and you get really good
Yeah.
at cold calling because you don't want to look like an idiot,
Yep. Yep. Best way to train.
Right.
Full cycle salespeople. They don't have many anymore. Those are an old dying breed.
No, I know.
So let's talk a bit about RevTech and
Mhm.
the notion of it. I'd love to, just if you could explain a bit your general perspective or philosophical perspective on this idea and how you got to it, and why it is that you're on the speaking circuit talking about this and how it relates to not only your job but other things you're trying to accomplish.
Yes, it's a lot, right? So I realize that in doing the job that I do over the years, technology has obviously evolved, and folks get different tools. They have their budgets, and they go out and kind of buy a tool because they want to solve a problem. And what I've found is that tools tend to one create kind of this attachment to your almost like your self-worth. Like, I have this tool, it's set up well, I'm doing great. And then inevitably, these tools don't always work with each other, or a marketing team will have one tool, a sales team will have another, and it just kind of gets out of control. So the whole idea of RevTech is it's revenue technology. And I've kind of defined it as any system that directly or indirectly influences the customer buying journey at any stage of the life cycle. And
Mhm.
so, as a rev ops leader, a sales ops leader, marketing, a CRO, you have different tools, primarily CRM, but there's a ton of them out there to, function and to drive revenue. Like, ultimately, that's what they're supposed to do. But a lot of times they end up causing people pain, or they cause data silos, they cause friction. And as a RevOps leader, it's almost like a means to an end, right? Like, I've got to have the tech dialed in and set up, but I don't want that to be my core job. So I try to talk to folks to say, like, in your organization, if you can sell this idea of RevTech, that it's really about the customer, it's not about the CRO owning something in their organization, and it's going to help your customer journey and focus on the customer lifecycle, it kind of breaks down some of those barriers, in my opinion, and helps to really do more of an alignment in an organization, not just from a budgeting perspective, but from a, like, should we do it perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. course. I know we're very aligned on this particular topic. I think interested to hear your perspective on the challenges that come with this, right? Most of my clients, just had a client conversation yesterday where, most of them are just sort of making very, let's say, impulsive, uninformed decisions
Mhm.
about the way in which they structure their businesses. I think there's this sort of, I don't know, hidden blueprint somewhere, like a Bible for companies, and they all just look at it and they just all build their companies the same way. The reason why a lot of these companies look the same is some of it makes sense. Some of it's been proven to be that it works. And so they're repeating models that work. But a lot of it is just stuff that people got lucky. It doesn't mean it necessarily was because that structure worked. It was because there's a lot of other factors that went into why that worked. And people are just looking at reverse engineering a company structure and saying, I'll just do what they did. And
Mhm.
then it doesn't work. And it's like, well, I don't get it. I did what they did. And it's like, well, no, you didn't. There's a lot of other things you're probably not looking at. And technology tends to be a boiling, pit for this because,
Mhm.
technologies are insidious. Once you pick one, you're sort of stuck with it. It's very difficult to unplug, rip out the cords of a technology, especially the type you and I are talking about. They become just,
Mhm.
they seep into every pore of the business. So, I'm sure if you had the luxury of working with companies early enough, you can just give them a
Mhm.
whole roadmap and say, this is how you should do this. But it doesn't happen
Right.
that way. Most of the time, I
Right.
suspect when you're introduced to an organization, they've already got legacy problems. How do you
Right.
undo that? What's the way that a company can, first get the stakeholders to recognize that this is something that they should do about?
Mhm.
Just to be frank, I don't think you'd probably have a problem getting people to agree with you. I think they'll all think you're making sense, but that doesn't mean they'll take any action on it.
Mhm.
So let's say they agree with your point of view, but then they're like, yeah, and I agree with it, but I'm really not going to do anything about it, even though I agree with you. What's the way that you would get somebody to be willing to invest not only the money, but all the pain that
Right.
goes with revamping
Right.
their technology?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because everybody, oh, they're like, "Oh, yeah, that makes so much sense," but then when the rubber meets the road, it's like,
Sure.
"Ooh, we're scared, we don't wanna change," and I think it comes down to basic change management, and, I've just recently kind of taken over the reins at a company with a lot of legacy systems and challenges, and change is hard, right? And even if we're doing it in a very inefficient way, it's the devil you know, it's what you're used to, so people will always tell me what I wanna hear in a meeting, and I'm very, good at getting people to agree with me. But when it comes down to, okay, we need sign off on the budget, we need to take this risk, it's getting people comfortable with the risk of change. What are all the things that come with the risk? So, for example, let's say you wanna switch over, a tool from one tool to another for a number of reasons. I'll typically switch a tool because it doesn't work well with the CRM. That's, if it works well with the CRM, then I'm going to say let's keep it and try to fix it. If it doesn't connect with the CRM, it doesn't integrate, then I'm going to say we need to get rid of it. And so it's really fear of the thing that they know. And then there's always a misperception of, oh, everybody uses it and everybody loves it. And it's like, well, let me show you some data that says
Mm.
otherwise. So there's a lot of perceptions that come behind it. I've had a sales manager make a, completely disruptive change because he was like literally the only power user of the tool, but he kicked and screamed the loudest. So therefore, the change didn't actually happen. So have to, kind of go back to plan B. So it's really just that understanding each individual's needs. It's just like a sales process. It's like consultative selling, like going to each stakeholder and saying, like, hey, if you change, here's a benefit, here are the risks, here's what we're doing to mitigate the risk. But the greater good is it impacts the customer. And I think some folks come into organizations and try to boil the ocean. If you're a consultant, it's easy to do because you can come in, tell them what they need to do, and if they don't do it, it's on them. But if you're an employee in an organization, it's a little bit harder. And I think that's the frustration when I talk to folks at conferences is how do I actually, enact that change? And but I think it just comes down to communication, collaboration, and mitigating risk and teaching folks that, the perception is one thing, but it's overall change management. And do you have a sound implementations plan? Do you have a realistic timeline? Do you already have the process built? Like, why are you getting the thing? Why are you making the change? Is it because a process is broken? And if it is, then you need to fix the process first, not put a band-aid on it. So, but yeah, it's hard. And the older the company is, the more tools there are, the more people who own the tools, the more difficult it is to get that alignment in an organization.
Yeah, everything you're saying resonates. I think if I'm listening, the problem that we're running into here is, again, it's one of the things that, it's like polls. If you run a poll, it's easy to get people to give you the answer that you want, whether they really
Right.
believe that to be true or not. And polls are clever because they're designed in a way to get the answers that they want, so they can create the narrative they want. And I think the same thing occurs with something like this. And this is
Yep.
why I make that distinction, or that analogy. And that's because if you went to every organizational group inside of a company and you asked them if the customer is important, of course, they're all going to say yes.
Right.
Who's going to say no? I mean, you'd be fired if you say the customer is not important. But there's probably to some degree, a lot of people would just even agree that the customer is important. But then if you try and take their dashboard away from them, that they just love so much, all of a sudden, the customer is not that important anymore, because I really
Right.
like working with this tool. And, for a lot of reasons. I mean, one is some software is just designed better, right? Whether it
Right.
works or not is sort of not part of it. It's the way that I interact with it. So if I have a particular piece of technology that I use and I like the way they built it because it's easy to use, or the interface is bespoke, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of other reasons why people are very accustomed to the tools that they use, and switching to a new tool is, it's a new tool, it's new learning, it's a new behavior, it's a new interface. There's a lot of emotion that comes up for people when they're being asked to be in new environments. It's so different than, like, if you go leave your house and you go to a different place for a month, all of a sudden you have to kind of acclimate to, like, a new
Right.
kitchen, and a
Yeah.
new shelving unit, in a different set of drawers. It's like you have to kind of change your brain in ways that we don't want to. It's a lot of work. And those things, all the things you're talking about, have very little to do with whether the tools work or not. And I
Right.
think that, going to the rank and file is the place where you need to change hearts and minds, because they're the ones that use this stuff every day. So if I go to the CEO or even the CTO and I say, look, ultimately, I think that they're typically, and I don't mean all of them, but most CEOs and CTOs are generally more strategic thinking about the business. They're looking at the bigger outcomes and how the things are making a difference on the bottom line. But the people in the middle of the organization, they don't. And it's not because they don't care. It's just that they're worried about their own day-to-day work. And
Hmm.
so, it's sort of, I'm asking this because I'm curious to know how, because you're right, this is a change management thing, really. How do you create enough of a ripple effect across an organization to have them evaluate their RevTech
Hmm.
such that they're willing to, like, undo
Hmm.
existing agreements, undo existing contracts, undo existing infrastructure? I mean, man, I've had people talk about moving to a different CRM, and it's
Hmm.
it's like earth shattering for people.
Hmm.
They'd much rather deal with the problems than do
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So what are your, like, how do you deal with those things?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I got kind of outed the other day for saying the word Salesforce in a meeting because we're a HubSpot shop and there's challenges. HubSpot's a great tool, but for different business needs and pricing and things, and there's some limitations there, and so it's a perception thing. There was a decision at some point to move over, and so it's definitely a sensitive topic. But I think back to, like, and I talked to someone the other day who's still dealing with this or just recently got off of Classic. I don't know if you've ever worked in Salesforce Classic, and there was a time where, like, everybody had to move over to Lightning. And for a long time, you could flip between views in Salesforce, right? But it drove all the admins crazy because the new reporting, everything was Lightning and building everything there, but people just refused to flip over until we forced it to go away, and then they couldn't do it.
Yeah, so given
So
a choice, they'd rather stick with what they're comfortable with than the new thing.
even though it's worse and more clunky,
Yeah,
and
because they're used to it. They're used to
yeah,
it.
and I do onboarding, and I'll get folks, we're a Microsoft shop. I'll get people over from G Suite, and they, like, for the first 3 weeks just freak out, like, dealing with Outlook and dealing with add-ins, if you're coming from a G Suite shop. So it's changed now. They're forced to do it because they don't have a choice. They're at a new company with new tools. So I'll, like, literally do, like, therapy sessions with them to say, hey, here's how you can make your view in Office 365 kind of look like Gmail, and kind of help them through their first couple of weeks. But yeah, it's tough. So but just an example of something that I'm doing right now. in our organization, we have a really, really huge operations organization, and the sales team and marketing team's all in HubSpot. The rest of the company is in Monday, and it's a very siloed. There's no communications, no data. So when I first started, I said, well, obviously I'm not going to boil the ocean and get everybody on a centralized CRM in a matter of months. So I started working with our implementations team who handles all the go live. So we already have a handoff process with them. So I started from a customer journey perspective, like here's our sales process, here's our marketing process. Now let's talk about our handoff process. We renamed that, we rebuilt stages, we defined roles and responsibilities. And then I'm like, last step is get you guys into HubSpot, because we needed to tie the tracking of our go lives, and we needed to improve the go live rate. So the problem I was trying to solve was generate more revenue quickly, reduce cancels. But I learned through my problem is, one, we had a disjointed handoff process. We were disconnected by systems, and we weren't tying back the go live status to the deal. So we didn't really know kind of what happened in the black hole after we sold the deal. So it was a number of problems to solve. One of them was working with the implementations team to get them into the CRM, because we needed their communications. We needed to see their calls. And so it just took me working outside of my CRO org with the head of the operations and the head of that team. And now we've expanded our HubSpot contract to include the service hub. We're in process. We've finished the process design. We finished the administrative design. Now we're in a training phase for the managers, and then we're going to roll in the rest of the consultants over February, March. So we're taking a small group of 30 people, bringing them in, but it's connecting a process. It's bringing the communications in. So that's the first step in pushing out to the rest of the organization, the rest of the operations team. So our plan is to prove this out as successful, and then take the next group of people, and then have this be an iterative plan over the next, essentially it's probably going to take 2 years to get, everybody kind of in operating in the same place, and having the communications, and phasing out some of the CRM activities that are happening in Monday, where they should be in the CRM in a centralized place. So that's an example of, change management. I went to the COO, work with him, work with his team, and we're doing it chunks at a time versus saying, voila, everybody's, because
no,
they'll
not boil
panic,
the ocean. You can't boil the ocean anyway. I think that probably would never sell through. So
No.
I think I applaud the approach, which is let's try it in certain areas and, create success stories that we can then, prove out the model, blah, blah.
Well, and the
Here's something-
data, don't forget the data, because I'm going to
Right.
improve the go live. Like, I believe fully this is going to drive revenue faster and improve our, our time from, close of sale to go live. Right.
Right. I
So,
mean, those are the sort of metrics that you want to use as proof points, right? So that goes to my next, I guess, question/point, which is the way that I've found that these sort of initiatives that seem dauntingly just too difficult to even fathom are usually substantiated is when you first can demonstrate how the current system is resulting in things that they don't want, right? So you have to be able to do that, right? So, what we're doing with our clients is, we're looking at things that sort of encompass technology, but they're more all encompassing, like the entire revenue process, like all the systems and organizational structure and all that stuff. And so like we have the same problem in that, it's not hard for me to get people to agree with my general premise. Everyone's like, yeah, it makes perfect sense. I'm seeing that happen. It's like we said, it's hard to get them to take action on it. So the step that we employ, which I suspect is probably similar to what you would employ, is, well, why don't we see how bad it really is?
Right.
So it's not theory, right? I mean, I have a theory here, and I've got credibility, but we don't have proof, right? Let's get proof, right? Pay me X, perform this assessment that's very specific. And I'm, usually I'm pretty right, because it's not too hard to discover problems with this stuff, is I'll yield a report that will demonstrate to you monetizable risks that you have in your current system. That now, once that's presented, now all of a sudden a case can be made, right? Because all of a sudden money talks, right?
Right.
If I see that the way that I got things set up, despite my love for this particular dashboard, is losing me money, or it's creating churn in my customers, or et cetera, then it's easy for me to refute someone's love affair they have with a specific piece of software when in fact I'm seeing that its use is creating an outcome that's negative to our bottom line. So
Right.
that's what I think, is the only way. But you have to get somebody to determine that, this is compelling enough for us to invest in an exploration to determine if in fact what we're doing is costing us money. It really is what it is. It's costing us money.
Right.
And that money could be a lot of ways. It could be translated to lack of efficiencies. People aren't working as effectively as they can. Maybe my OpEx is too heavy. I don't need this many people. I can probably work with a lot less people. I'm losing customers. We're not charging enough for customers, or we're losing in pipeline, churn, things that I think if you can demonstrate, how do you do that? Like, what's the way that you produce evidence to support your thesis?
I mean, first thing I do is jump right into the CRM and just run an analysis. So that's the first thing I did when I got over to Patra is like, okay, what are the current sales results? Everything from average deal size to sales cycle time to, how long the deal has been in the system. So what are they actually using it for? Are they logging in? Are their apps connected? I mean, I just went through a full, and you'll inevitably find something ugly, right? I mean, you're going to. It took me, literally less than 5 minutes to, kind of get an assessment of what was happening. I just, going into the analytics tool and just, seeing what's there and what's happening, what's not happening. So I think it's pretty easy to find, when you're jumping into the systems, and then, asking people, like asking, okay, well, why asking the sales managers, what are your biggest problems? I put a quick survey out when I started at Patra for the sales folks to say, like, where are you spending your time? And most of them are spending their time in spreadsheets and going into multiple systems because our data is in a lot of different places. And it's a lot of it's just in spreadsheets in people's email inboxes. So I think starting with just real basic metrics like, what is your close ratios stage to stage. I figured out the stages weren't sequential and people were just starting at stage 4. They weren't even putting deals in the pipeline. They were just kind of throwing them in at the end, and the ones that were sitting there had been there for, 200, 300 days.
Mm,
So I think getting those analytics and then just saying, what are some small tweaks? Because a lot of times it's just a very small tweak that you can do to make an improvement, right? It's just something that, maybe not connected, or some person that's not getting informed, or something that wasn't updated. But yeah, just, kind of getting some of those basic core metrics, because if the data isn't in there, that means they're not putting something in there. You're not capturing it. So you have to, kind of see what's out there first.
agreed. So who do you think is a stakeholder here? Is it the revenue operations leader? Is it the chief revenue officer? Is it the head of sales? Like, who's the person you think really not is, but should be
Mhm.
the one who's running or in charge of this particular decision?
I mean, I think that it needs to be sponsored by the entire C-suite or it doesn't work. Ultimately if your org, has a CRO or it just depends on the org structure, I guess theoretically they'd be ultimately accountable for, what I call the revenue engine, right? But in terms of the decision making, the RevOps leader should be advising like what should happen, and there needs to be C-suite sponsorship. That's when it doesn't work. So, when I was at Nimbus, when I first kind of came up this idea with RevTech, the whole idea was like I needed to get the C-suite on board, and our CEO invited me to their little meeting and allowed me to present my idea that we needed to consolidate because I found a number of systems that we could get rid of. There were like 4 project management tools. It was crazy. So I was like, I had a great boss who like let me kind of run my sphere of control, but outside of that things were, really owned by operations and project management stuff. So I needed to get up to that C-suite level and get them all bought in that one, we're spending money on duplication. So I put together a deck that, just started out with our problems that we were trying to solve. And I had a number of tools that I was able to say we can get rid of if people can, get outside of their egos. Like these 3 tools do the same thing. And so I came up with a pretty sizable money to the tune of 6 figures to say, like, I can off the top reduce this in our budget next year and bring these processes together and improve our communications and reduce the number of meetings because people are in different systems. So I essentially pitched the C-suite on that, they needed to sponsor the project and I needed money for a headcount to help me do it. And I was successful when I did that. And that's when I kind of took this RevTech idea because they were so bought into it. And we did make the changes. We went through, but it wasn't until I went to the C-suite and got that buy-in, got that actual sponsorship. Literally, the COO at the time, she was like, all right, and the CMO, they were like, both of them were like, all right, everyone pull up the couch cushions and get Sandy some money so she can execute this plan because we need to do this. And so it wasn't until that time that I was able to get them, and I appealed to their greed and the fact that, I threw some data up there that said, we basically suck today and you're paying for tools that you shouldn't be because I literally put 3 project management tools and the head of product was in there. I was like, you guys are using this tool. I won't name the tools right now because people freak out. And
It
then
was like
there
a
was a head of operations.
Trello and a Monday and an
Yeah,
Asana,
okay.
right?
So
Yeah.
there were 3. And then we
Yeah.
even had 2 instances of Monday. And I was like,
They're all fine. It's just pick one, that's all it is,
yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
matter. And so
Yeah.
if you just got rid of 2 of
I see
them,
that a lot. I see that a
we'd
lot.
say,
I see crazy things like that. I see groups inside the organization using a different tool to manage their projects that are
yeah,
outside of what everybody else is. Well, we like it
yep,
better. Or, just what happened was they
yep,
hired somebody who uses it all the time and they
yeah,
made that suggestion to the group. And
yep,
there's all these really strange little pockets of authority that go on in little silos like this, right? You have a group of people who are working on a project and there's someone who's in charge of it. And that person has some kind of endowed authority to make that decision
mhm,
and just says, we're going to use Asana, which
yep,
again, not to knock it, it's fine. And everyone says, okay. And
yep,
then no one steps in and goes, yeah, Steve, listen, no, our company uses this, how are we going to
yeah,
extrapolate that into the rest of the
yeah,
organization? And they create these little small
yep,
factions. And that sort of goes to, my premise, which is if you my point of view on this whole topic, if you don't have someone in charge of the whole revenue operation, these things are going to happen. Because if somebody
right,
has to basically make these decrees
right,
and have the authority and the autonomy and the control to be able to say to everybody, all right, look, I know there are going to be some, rogues here and some mavericks that want to go out and bring in
mhm,
your technologies and stuff. And I get that, but here are the tech that we're going to use for the
yep,
following categories, right? We're a this house, we're an Asana house, we're a
yep,
HubSpot house, right? And that's it. And I know everyone's
yep,
going to get all upset, but I have to make these decisions because we have to interoperate, and we can't have fragmented technologies floating around here. I bet I've seen this before. You do an audit, let's say, of your company, and
mhm,
you find all these weird credit cards on file with all these weird platforms that some guy in some mid manager level just went and paid for it themselves. They were
yep,
frustrated, and now you're using it, and company data is in it, and it's like,
yep,
how do we get this? Well, Bob picked it one day because,
yep,
and it's tough because on one hand, and I think this is where an interesting part of it too is this. Let's go like the evolution of a company is there's a point where you sort of want people to have that nimbleness. You want to encourage them to make decisions and be proactive and remove friction because we have to move. But then there's a point where that stuff becomes really a problem. All of a sudden,
mhm,
everyone's making decisions.
right,
The friction is removed to the point where now no one's on the same
right,
page. And I see that our business model, when we're implementing, is designed to help mitigate the change between, let's say, the startup pre-complexity phase to the post-growth stage complexity phase, which is where
mhm,
those things start to happen. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, guys, I know that we've been asking you all to be really intrepid and bold, but we have to kind of cut the shit, because
right,
now, if you have too much flexibility, you might make a decision that interferes. So we do have to create some standards
right,
and guidelines, and we have to make a decision. There's probably some technology council that should be created at around 15 million in revenue. Where you go, okay,
mhm,
we are a HubSpot house.
yep,
We are a Monday house,
yep,
and and I just think you got to double down on these things. And it's probably a really worthwhile exercise to have just some organization go through an audit and find out like
mhm.
how many errant technologies are floating around with subscriptions in them,
I did
that are
I did
dead.
that. I did that
Yeah.
audit at Nimbus and, it was funny because I work with the finance team and I got, I said, "I need the credit card subscription, the recurring credit cards, because I know there are other accounts out there." And we found them. They were automated. We found like 10 more tools that people had, a subscription of $20 a month to that they were using outside of, whatever the other tools were. And it was very easy to find. But I pushed forward that audit myself because I was trying to come up with money to say, like, you guys need to back me on this RevTech thing. I know people are doing bad things that you don't even know. And so I kind of pulled that through and it was impactful, but someone's got to do it. The head of the IT department should be doing it, or if there's a CIO, a lot of companies don't have a CIO, but those are the kind of things that they should be running. Or if you have a procurement process, and even in the procurement process, this is where I jumped in is like, yeah, everybody has budget. Yeah, it meets, whatever security criteria. We vetted 3 vendors, blah, blah, blah. But we need to answer the question, should we do it? Should we do it? Does this make business sense? Do we have another tool? And that's the step that needs to go in. But it gets out of control fast, to your point. Like a startup, it starts out very innocently. I need to get this thing to get it done. I get the free version. Then I got the team version. Then now it's the enterprise version because we've grown. Now you've hired 3 more VPs in who got their own tools. And it just, it gets out of control like
Yeah.
super, super
This
fast.
is like the crazy insidiousness of the freemium model, which is brilliant. I mean, it works. I got to give them credit. It's no
Right.
question, but it's too easy to sign up for software. And then, what
Right.
happens is all of a sudden you add one team member and it's like, yeah, I guess I can afford another 15 $15 a month. Why not? I'll
Right.
add Maria to the team. And then bam, now you're a
Yep.
paid user. You get the pro, pop
Yep.
up every once in a while and it says you can get these 3 features. It's
Yeah.
incredible how smart these companies are.
Yep.
And it's very simple for the human being to get behaviorally indoctrinated into that
Mhm.
timeline and all of a sudden find themselves 6 months later all of a sudden being a power user of something that they just wanted to try once because they needed it.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
guilty of this.
Yeah.
And the implications for me are different in that yes, it costs me more because I have a smaller company, but yeah, I'm not using as many things. But if I get a pro version for 25 people, that's a lot of money that's
Yeah.
being spent on something that may not be even
Yeah.
integrated or utilized properly. No one's been trained on it properly.
Mhm.
So, like I want to make sure we're kind of wrapping up in a way that makes this ties a bow on this, right? So, I think we're certainly in agreement that the RevTech issue is one that can very quickly get out of control. And it's a big area for misalignment in data misalignment and process misalignment. And it's one that is difficult to untrench, right? So I guess I'd say is, what are some of the top 3 or 4 things that you'd say? Let's say someone's listening to this right now and they're saying, oh my God, I get this is exactly what I'm dealing with right now. And
Mhm.
what do I do? Like, what's the first thing I can do to create some movement around changing this before it gets out of control?
I like to start with the customer journey. It's to me, the easiest way to bring this conversation up without kind of coming in a threatening way. Because anytime you go set up a meeting with somebody about a tool, start the conversation, it immediately is like a defensive like conversation. So I think every company should have some sort of a customer journey map. The RevOps leader should own that. They should have one, right? And if you're a leader and your RevOps leader doesn't have some sort of customer journey or process map or blueprint, you need to get one and work on one. But it's a great way to map out all the technology you have, who owns it, and just being inquisitive and getting that kind of out into the world in your company and just starting there. And then asking questions like, oh, well, why did you get that tool? When did you get that tool? How does it work for you? Do all the teams use it? Do you think they should use it? And just literally starting from your inbound lead process, going to your marketing team, and then to your sales leaders and into, if you have project management, any sort of onboarding process and the customer success teams, and really just mapping out, their journey and what tools they use and just kind of starting there. And inevitably people start engaging, go, oh, well, yeah, well, what do you use? And it just breaks down the barriers. Like I do this and I find that because you want their input. Like, well, where do you come in our sale? Where do you come in the sales process? Where should you come in? And then inevitably you start talking about the tools. So I think that's a great approach to it. And to answer your earlier question, like you should empower your RevOps leader to own that. And I think that as, the true RevOps leader should be more of an advisory role, not just, okay, here's some tech, go administer it. That's really a means to the end of driving revenue, right? So if they're starting with this customer journey and going throughout the organization to really tie that all together, I think that's a great way to start anyway, to start the conversation.
Mhm. Good stuff. So you're on the speaking circuit, you're talking a lot. What other things are you up to and what are you trying to accomplish? How can people help you?
Yeah, so I'm having fun. I've been working on some kind of new content around this whole idea of taking, everybody has sales methodology or some sort of, training or consultative selling, whatever the approach is, right? We've got spin selling, we've got challenger, there's, in a SaaS, maybe it's like demo to win. We're rolling out command of the message. And, my background, my more recent background is, I have a master's degree in training and education. And,
Okay.
how do you sustain these things, right? We spend money, companies spend $70 billion, I think, in the US a year on training, an average of like 1,500 per salesperson. And they have
Mm,
these event-based training. And now, kind of post-COVID, everybody's doing in-person stuff. And if you've ever been through one of these things, you've probably been through many of them. I have in
yep.
my career. How many have sustained and are successful? And I think that in I've had experiences rolling out great successful programs and really horrible programs. And
Mm,
the difference is in the strategy and the rollout, right? One, kind of going back to RevTech, having the C-suite, true buy-in and support, not just sponsorship, but like living and breathing it. But really this whole idea of tying the methodology to the process, right? To your
mhm.
internal processes, that customer journey, mapping out like literally when does each item happen, and then enabling it in the technology. If it's not everywhere a salesperson goes, they are not going to consistently do it. If the sales leaders aren't consistently coaching and they don't have the tools to do it, it's going to, it's going to end up, getting caught in the trap of the forgetting curve, right? Like because
Mm,
after 30 days, like you forget 90% of everything you learned in an event-based training. So it's really just tying that all together. Technology is the way to continually see it and have it be top of mind. But if you don't have all three of those components, the methodology, the process, and the technology like working together, it's going to fail. Like I've just seen it. So that's kind of some of the new stuff that I've been working on and excited about, some of the work that I've been doing and rolling out consultative selling and MedPick and things and trying new things and trying to get people engaged and to continue and to develop and coaching and everything.
mm. That's great. Yeah, I'd kind of put a bow on that and emphasize how I believe maybe I'm being a bit opportunistic, but the CRO really needs to be ultimately the call general on this stuff, mainly because, if you look at all the people that are all the stakeholders you're talking about, having a leader who runs revenue be the person who sets forth all these directives and owns it is really going to make it a lot easier. Well, great. So I hope I see you in New York in March.
Yeah, for
Again, the
sure.
Chief Revenue Officer Summit is March 20th, and that whole event is, I think, like the whole week in New York,
Hmm.
and we'll have fun there. And really, again, thank you so much for coming on. Again, love your content, and I think what you're saying makes so much sense. And I really appreciate you spending some time with me today.
I really appreciate you having me. I appreciate the discussion. It's fun and love the back and forth and look forward to seeing you in New York as well.
All right, great.